Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and welcome to my guide to Storm's Crown Extreme, the latest Extreme trial in patch 6.2 up against Barbariccia. Reminder that this is a week 1 guide made off of just 5 clears and all the wipes between. If someone comes up with something more efficient, please adapt, as it's very likely there will be easier strategies as time goes on. Before starting the fight, I'd advise setting up a few positions for each player. Clock spots will help with spreading out for certain mechanics, as you see here. Just make sure that the tanks and healers are on cardinals and DPS are on intercardinals. The healer should also be at least 90 degrees apart. Also, there's lineup assignments that you can do that are pretty useful. Try to have tanks and melees closer to the middle of the line like you see in the example here. We'll talk more about this a little bit later. Our markers were also useful for us, as you see in the video, but I'm sure there are other layouts that work just fine. Barbariccia herself is split into 2 distinct modes, each one having their own mechanics that evolve as the fight progresses. Phase 1 will start her in sword mode. Her basic room-wide AoE here is Void Arrow 4, and her tank buster is Void Arrow 3. Void Arrow 3 will require a tank swap, and both tanks should use some form of mitigation to cut the damage. You can also tank and vuln both hits and avoid the swap, but given some of the other mechanics later, you may want to hold on to them instead of using them on this super easy tank swap. Barbariccia will also proceed most of her attacks in sword mode phase by dashing to the center and using Raging Storm. It doesn't do that much AoE damage, but don't let anyone linger on low health. Her first mechanic is Savage Barbary. This attack will show an arrow from the boss to one of the 4 cardinal edges of the room, with a big AoE hitting that spot after the cast bar finishes. She will also hold her sword in one of 2 ways to indicate another attack during the cast bar. If she holds the sword over her head, she will do a line AoE through the middle, perpendicular to the arrow's location. If she holds it on her side, she will instead do a donut AoE. All this attack boils down to is going to the opposite side of her hitbox from the side the arrow is pointing, and then either standing in or out of her hitbox depending on her stance. Once you can readily identify her animations, it's simple. This attack is followed up with Hair Raid, which also has several possible outcomes based on her animations. If Barbariccia hovers above the ground during the cast, she will do a donut AoE in the center. If she rears herself and looks like she's gonna pounce, she will dash towards the side of the room she hit during Savage Barbary, before turning and hitting the room with a large conal AoE. For this one, you'll need to get close to the wall on the side she is dashing to avoid the hit. Whichever of these 2 animations she does, she also either does a spread AoE or 2 split damage AoEs aimed at the healers. For donut plus spread, we use our clock spots. Note that you have to wait until the animation for the donut AoE is in full swing before moving out, as it doesn't actually snapshot until way after the cast bar. You can also reserve the dead center of the AoE for a caster or a healer so they don't have to move as much. It's also worth confirming with your group whether or not you're doing boss relative or true north for your spread positions, just so there's no confusion. For true north, I like to add a little flag to my minimap as a reminder. For wall plus spread, that's what we use those line spots that we designated earlier for. Melee and tanks want priority near the boss for obvious reasons, so the healers and ranged want to be further out along the wall. One of your tanks can also step in front of the boss after the conal AoE, like you see here, for more space, so you don't clip each other. For either the split damage AoEs, just break off into groups of 4, we did it based on our clock positions. We did south to northwest for our left group, and north to southeast for our right stack. This works regardless of donut or wall patterns for Hair Raid, and it's totally flexible to be done any way you want. After you complete Hair Raid once, Barbariccia will return to the center, do another Raging Storm, and then do the complete opposite of whatever she did the first time. If you had a donut AoE for Savage Barbary, the second time it will be the line AoE. If you had wall safe spots for Hair Raid, you'll have a donut, and if you had spreads or stacks for the follow-up damage, it'll just be the opposite of that. This leaves a decent number of permutations available, but it should all be familiar quickly. After the second Hair Raid, Barbariccia will do a Void Arrow 4 and 3 before dashing to the center and using Raging Storm. This is followed up by her next mechanic, Teasing Tangles. This attack will stun and divide the 8 players amongst 4 different circular zones. While in the zone, your movement speed is greatly reduced, and if you try to leave the zone, you will be pulled back in and inflicted with a massive dot. Basically, you're just trying to resolve other mechanics within this limited space. With each zone now having 2 players, each one will receive a mechanic. One player in each zone will have a giant AoE that gives magic vuln up, meaning it can't overlap with any other player. These AoEs are so large, you'll likely end up disengaging from the boss entirely to safely position them, though you can finesse a couple of melee spots should you desire. The other player will either have a stack marker that requires 2 players to survive, or nothing at all. The players with the stack marker need to stand on the edge of their zone and overlap with a player in an adjacent zone that has nothing in order to survive. Our number markers in this setup determine our position for this mechanic. Regardless of who gets dragged where, we have the large AoEs lean towards the side of their zone closest to the odd numbered markers, 1 and 3, while the stack and nothing players meet up near the even numbered markers, 2 and 4. This should allow an easy resolution and allow you to quickly position once you see what assignment you have with very little variation. During these AoEs resolving, Barbariccia will also cast Secret Breeze. This attack first performs a large conal AoE through the center of all 4 zones, just giving you another obstacle to avoid. After this cast finishes, every player will shortly after be hit by a conal AoE. These give physical vuln ups, so you just need to be spread out and not clip each other with these. For the players who are handling the stack markers, ensure you take a step away from each other after that resolves to ensure you don't clip each other with Secret Breeze. After another Void Arrow 4, Barbariccia will cast Curling Iron. This attack deals high damage and begins her phase transition. Don't stand in the center of the room here, as she will deal damage and push players out while she channels her transformation after the cast. Once that finishes, she will launch herself into the air before slamming back down with Catabus for big raid-wide damage. This ushers in her second mode, Hair Mode. We stack up north on the side of the room during all of this since she is facing south, so we'll be behind her for positionals. Also, the wall will now have an incredibly dangerous dot applied to you if you touch it, so watch out. Hair Mode is a fast and frantic phase, but it's actually quite predictable. Barbariccia will start by performing Brutal Rush on the 4 tanks and healers. The attack itself does low single target damage to each tethered target one at a time, but a narrow line AoE quickly resolves after. If she dashes at you, sidestep quickly to avoid the line AoE. For the first ones, tanks and healers should just stand away from the DPS and resolve it themselves. After that first attack, she will begin spamming tons of AoEs like crazy. General rule of thumb, focus on survival overall during this. The tanks should stand together on the same side of the room that they dodged Brutal Rush, as there will be a stacked tank buster that they'll want to share with cooldowns. Everyone else just needs to stand away from the tank so they don't get hit. As soon as the red AoE in the center resolves for the first time, the entire party can rush to the middle of the room. They will all be targeted with giant markers over their heads. When that marker disappears, they will drop huge AoEs on the ground. Baiting them all in the same place eliminates any stray AoEs from catching your party off guard while you dodge them. As soon as these AoEs drop, every player will also get a spread AoE, so sprint to your spread location that you set up at the start of the fight, out of range of all the other AoEs that are all over the place. Now, couple of notes. 1, ensure not to move early. These resolve a couple of seconds after a red AoE reappears in the middle of the room, but don't move out the second that AoE appears. That's just a little bit too early. Wait until the markers go away proper. Second, you can actually get melee uptime if you offset the AoE slightly from the center and then send all 4 melees to the opposite side, albeit spread out. I find it is a decent amount of risk for maybe an extra global cooldown or 2, so I ended up just not doing it for that day 1 clear. I'm sure there are also other positions that work well also, but it's just not a lot of time we had to finesse this, so this is how we common sensed our way into a solution. After the spread AoEs resolve, each tank and healer will get a 2-player stack marker like the ones from before. We just have them move over to the intercardinal partner while we dodge the AoEs on the ground. This is why we made sure the tanks and heals were cardinal and DPS were intercardinal earlier. Our markers are even color coordinated for the same reason. Not that that helps me. Once the stacks resolve, Barbariccia will tether 4 more players for Brutal Rush. Since you're likely a bit scattered, just pay attention and sidestep any rushes. It's kind of hard to coordinate baiting these in a certain way at this point. Once that 4th rush resolves, Barbariccia will go to the center and begin spamming Knuckle Drum. This is a gradually building room-wide AoE that hits a ton of times. Repeat heal or shields like Liturgy or Panhaima are great for this skill, as are things like Reprisals and Feints. Just to be sure to respect the damage, mitigate, and heal. While Knuckle Drum is casting, we stack up behind her for her next attack, Blow Away. This deals some damage, but then drops 4 back-to-back AoEs on party members. We stack them up and just kite clockwise around the boss. There are also 4 more brutal rushes here, but since you're already rotating, these end up just resolving themselves. Right after the last ground AoE, Barbariccia will place a proximity AoE on both tanks and a split damage AoE on a healer. We have the tanks bring their proximity AoEs northwest and northeast, while the rest of the party stacks south. There's also a small knockback from the blue circle in the middle of the room, so knockback resist or just be close enough to it without being in it so you don't go into the wall. Just ensure you also have decent shields and mitigation for this one as well, and don't hang too close to the middle as any job. If you're a tank, it's going to be too close to the party. If you're the party, you're going to be too close to the tank, and with the damage you're taking here, you don't want that. After another 4 brutal rushes to avoid, you'll come to the second teasing tangles. Once again, 2 players will be dragged into each zone, but this time you'll be given just a bunch of random ground AoEs to avoid at first, including tornadoes flying out from the center. Focus on survival over DPS here, especially considering there is some forced downtime during this part. Now, after a point blank and donut staggered AoE resolves, 4 players will be marked for those 2-player stack markers again. These 4 players will always be in zones opposite of each other, which makes resolving them rather simple. Every zone has 1 DPS and 1 non-DPS player, so we just have every DPS go clockwise in their zone, and every non-DPS go counterclockwise. Regardless of who or where the stack markers show up, this resolves them so long as the players are standing close enough to actually hit each other. That being said, beware of all the AoEs and especially those slow tornadoes coming from the center. They really creep up along the edges of the zones right as you're trying to resolve the stack marker, so either get skinny or be prepared to make some last second movements. As soon as the zones disappear, Barbariccia will use Knuckle Drum again, so mitigate and heal through that. Once that is done, get out of the very center and wait for Barbariccia to transform back into Sword Mode. Don't forget the room-wide damage from this. Sword Mode number 2 is mostly the same attacks with a couple of additions. After the first Raging Storm, she will cast Entanglement. This places 4 different shaped markers over players' heads with 2 of each mark. We call these PlayStation markers for obvious reasons. Anyway, players with the same marker will be tethered and pulled to each other when the cast finishes. Additionally, you'll be shown a circle between you and your partner. If either of you gets too far from each other, you will be pulled to each other, meaning you must stay close the whole time. We actually have each PlayStation marker go to a number that's similar in color, so circles to 1, triangles to 2, X's to 3, and squares to 4. This helps us pre-position for the next mechanic and ensure we don't need to adjust too far with our partner. For this first entanglement, Barbariccia will cast Secret Breeze. This works the same as before, so we just separate within the 4 safe cones as you see here, which then leaves us with enough room to spread out for the follow-up AoEs that Secret Breeze does. Once entanglement number 1 is done, Barbariccia will do Savage Barbary plus Hair Raid, exactly the same as Sword Mode number 1. She follows this up with a Void Arrow 4 and 3 as well. Once she jumps back to the center and uses Raging Storm again, she'll cast Entanglement a second time, which we use the same assignments for. This time, however, she will give 2 pairs of players those 2 stack markers we've seen a bunch of times already. Now we have 2 ways of doing this depending on the pattern that she gives us. If these pairs are opposite of each other, the unmarked players just inch over to fill the nearby marker. If the pairs are right next to each other, they meet up with the closest unmarked player pair. Since every pair is 1 DPS and 1 non-DPS, we just had the DPS in each pair stack and the non-DPS in each pair stack, and easy peasy. After this, Barbariccia will do whatever Savage Barbary plus Hair Raid combo she didn't use the first time. 1 more Void Arrow 4 and she will cast Curling Iron to phase change again. This time she doesn't do the huge leap into the air, however. In Hair Mode number 2, she will again mostly do the same attacks with some slight changes. She starts the phase doing 4 brutal rushes before immediately doing Knuckle Drum. Just dodge the brutal rushes together and then stay stacked for healing and the mechanic after Knuckle Drum. Knuckle Drum's immediately followed by those 4 back-to-back ground AoEs, but around the time the 3rd ground AoE appears, all 8 players will be marked like they were in Hair Mode number 1, primed to drop those large AoEs on the ground. As soon as the 4th ground circles are baited, we all head to the center to bait the marker AoEs like we did the first time in Hair Mode. Once those are baited, we spread for the follow-up AoE. Simple. While the 8 spread AoEs are being resolved, however, the 4 DPS will begin getting brutal rushed. The first player selected will actually have to dodge it as they are spreading, putting them at a much greater risk. While it is possible to do this safely, I have done it before, I suspect we'll soon see the markers placed off-center after the ground AoE rotation, with all 8 players spreading out from that position instead. This automatically creates angles that make the follow-up brutal rushes much safer, even if the spread positioning isn't as clean, at least not for everyone. Right after that, there will be a point blank and donut AoE, followed by every player getting another spread. Barbariccia will do a knockback AoE from the center, so spread positions and anti-knockback for this. After another 4 brutal rushes, she will dash to the center for one last AoE extravaganza. Have the 2 tanks take one side of the room while everyone else hangs out on the other. Ideally behind the boss for positionals, unlike what we're doing in our clear here. Just dodge, dodge, dodge until you get to the 2 proximity AoEs and 1 split damage AoE mechanic again. There's no knockback with these this time, so just spread the same way you did before, closer to the wall by default. Mitigate this a lot, because it will immediately be followed up by knuckle drums and a phase transition for tons of raid-wide damage. Once Barbariccia is back in sword mode for the 3rd time, the enrage is close. She will simply do the spread entanglement, savage barbary, hair raid, and a void arrow 4, before jumping to the middle for her enrage cast. All in all, you have about 11 minutes before she enrages. For your spoils, you can enjoy an item level 615 weapon and coffer, plus all the usual extreme trial trimmings. She also does drop 2 totems per clear, thankfully, or you could just win the mount. You know, not like I'd know what that's like. Not me getting it in 3 clears, not at all. Overall, while this fight is super hectic and it may seem a bit overwhelming, it's very, very predictable. Get the patterns down, get the positions down, and it won't feel any different than doing any other extreme trial, especially as people pick up normal mode gear, crafted gear, extreme trial weapons, and eventually tombstone gear and raid gear. It'll only get easier as the weeks go on. Anyway, thank you for watching this guide. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and stay tuned for everything patch 6.2. I got it coming your way. Anyway, thanks for watching, and until next time, take care.